Okay, let's try and unpack this. Today, we are attempting something, well, entirely new and I think conceptually pretty daring.
I'd say so.
We've been handed a stack of source material. That is, and I mean this literally, a single, dense, custom-supplied text.
Mm.
It's a eulogy dedicated to a man named Kizmo Yapfarkle.
And this is not your typical biography? Not at all.
No, it's more like a philosophical manifesto. It's a document so dense, spectacularly jargon-laden that we have to approach it like code breakers.
It is the maximal complexity delivered in maximal density. And it's really tailored precisely for you, the learner, who craves that kind of depth.
Right.
Yapfarkle, our subject, was the inventor of something called the flying pickle.
Which we will get to.
Oh, we will. But more importantly, he was a linguistic architect whose entire life was dedicated to proving that complexity equals worth.
So our mission today, it's like a kind of linguistic triage, right? We have to decode the core vocabulary of Yapfarkle's world.
And these are, let's be honest, frankly terrifying words.
Yeah.
Like paraflocanos and a hilification knowledge.
We'll get that one down by the end of this, I promise.
We have to. And through that, we need to understand the grand contradictory nature of his intellectual quest for something called the gallimorphic infinitogram.
So the mission, then, is to find the meaning hidden within the maximal complexity. It's an intellectual exercise in patience.
Definitely.
And we have to start with the foundational idea of his whole existence, the core assumption that powered the entire enterprise.
Honorificably dinitatism.
There it is, our first one.
That is the foundation. Honorificabilitudinitism is our very first key concept. At its simplest, it means the state of necessary, ineluctable being.
Okay, or
Just
high honorability.
maximal high honorability. But what's fascinating here, and this is the key, is that Yapfarkle didn't just seek high honorability as a goal.
No.
No, he believed it was a necessary state, an intrinsic, non-negotiable property of reality that just had to be proven through extreme complication.
So his life wasn't a search for genius. It was more like an experiment designed to validate that maximal conceptual difficulty was the only path to inherent worth.
Exactly.
If you don't make it complex, it can't possibly be worthy.
That's his logic, precisely. His every choice, every invention, every, polysyllabic utterance was an attempt to provide empirical evidence for his own honorificabilitudinitatism.
We are studying a life lived as a proof of concept.
A very, very long and complicated proof.
Okay, so let's begin the story. Because where this intellectual titan began, his life immediately sets the tone for, well, contradiction. We start our deep dive not in Vienna or Cambridge,
No.
but in Muckhole, Alberta in 1888.
And the location itself is the first great conceptual hurdle we have to grapple with. The source is very, very clear on this. Yapfarkle's birth in Muckhole is described as an inherent antithetic agoria.
Okay, an antithetical allegory,
Yeah.
which is, it's a specific high-concept literary device where the core idea, the subject, fundamentally contradicts its setting.
The ultimate mismatch.
Yes, it really is.
You have the most complex intellect of his age, a mind destined for cosmic philosophy, and he arises from the most jejune,
Jejune?
the most intellectually barren, practical-minded landscape imaginable, a ranching community focused entirely on, clearing detritus from rills.
So just muck.
Muck, the source literally calls him a true intellectual geode, emerging from a tundra of simple folk.
I love that. A geode, simple on the outside, crystalline complexity within.
And this juxtaposition, this maximal complexity being born into maximal simplicity, it's not a fluke. The eulogy argues it is the philosophical crucible that forges his entire existence.
That really sets up the central tension we have to track then. This is constant war between the simplicity and practicality of the Canadian frontier and the, frantic, hyper-complicated, jargon-fueled logic running inside Yapfarkle's head.
And this battle, this cognitive conflict, it started incredibly early. It manifested in his speech patterns.
As a child.
As an infant, even. The source notes that his infant utterances were instantly misidentified by his rancher father as a severe speech impediment.
Which they weren't.
Not at all. They were the early, unrefined expressions of aprosolobicality.
Aparasalamicality. Okay, break that one down for us because it just sounds exhausting.
It is the conceptual equivalent of a superdense star. It's more than just oppressions for long words.
Right.
It's a predisposition for maximal syllable count and what the source terms linguistic hypertrophy.
Hypertrophy, like overgrowth in muscles. So,
Yeah.
linguistic overgrowth.
The pathological overgrowth of language. It wasn't that his vocal cords or brain were incapable of simplicity. It's that his mind rejected brevity as conceptually insufficient for capturing reality.
So if you ask him a simple question like, do you want some water? He couldn't process it simply. His brain had to justify the answer through layers and layers of conceptual analysis.
That is the operation of pseudoparadoxicalizationality in a pre-adolescent mind.
Another big one.
It's a logic that only appears contradictory to an outside observer.
Hmm.
To a muckhole rancher, his speech was just nonsense, a frustrating refusal to be direct.
Right.
But to Yapfarkle, he was simply demonstrating that a single, direct syllable like yes could never contain the full ontological weight of his response.
The ontological weight, so the sheer reality of the thing.
Exactly. The complexity wasn't a choice. It was a conceptual necessity, dictated by the absolute need for honorificability-dinititism in all things.
I think I get it. It's like to save money, a simple mind buys the cheapest tool.
Yeah.
But Yapfarkle's mind, operating under this pseudo-paradoxicalizationality, he would realize the cheapest tool means lower quality, which means greater effort and greater intellectual inefficiency in the long run.
Right, the paradox.
So the only logical answer, despite the higher financial cost, is to buy the most complex, expensive tool to save intellectual time. This is a paradox to the rancher, but pure, ineluctable logic to Yapfarkle.
Precisely. You've grasped the internal engine of his thought. And this leads us directly to the assessment of his earliest academic work. His teachers, they recognized that while his reports were, and I'm quoting here, incoherent, they were also somehow strangely rhythmic.
Incoherent but rhythmic.
Yes, they eventually labeled these torture reports an incoherent but strangely rhythmic stream of obnubile aggregationalisms.
That sounds like the most beautifully phrased academic put-down I've ever heard.
It does, doesn't it?
But if we dive past the surface definition of just, verbal clutter, what were these obnubile aggregationalisms really trying to achieve?
They were Yapfarkle's genuine, albeit chaotic, attempts to quantify the ontological weight, the inherent reality and significance of every perceived reality.
The essay inside.
The essay, the being in itself. For Yapfarkle, a simple name, a short phrase, it just amputated the reality he was supposed to describe.
Can you give us a concrete example so we can truly feel the intellectual burden here?
Okay, sure. Imagine he was asked to write a report on a simple farming implement, say a shovel.
Okay, a shovel.
A normal student writes, "The shovel is made of wood and metal, and it is used to move dirt." Simple.
Straightforward.
Yapfarkle, operating under obnubile aggregationalisms, couldn't stop there. For him, the shovel was not merely a shovel, it was the historical trajectory of the metallic ore extracted from the mine.
Wow.
The socioeconomic framework that facilitated its forging in Pittsburgh, the geological pressure that created the wood for the handle, and the metaphysical concept of toolness itself, all interwoven into a single reality.
So he wasn't trying to confuse people. He was trying to be maximally precise in a way that our existing language structure just cannot handle.
Yes.
If a normal person just said, the shovel is heavy, Yapfarkle would generate like 10 minutes of complex speech explaining why the shovel's metal composition and historical trajectory demanded that weight, and why the simple phrase heavy shovel was an unforgivable act of conceptual reduction.
His narrative was sprawling and polysyllabic, because reality to him was sprawling and polysyllabic. The obnubile aggregationalisms were the only honest way to capture that narrative complexity and maintain the object's honorificability-dinititism.
And this maximal internal complexity clashed, violently with his environment. The source describes his youth as an early, cruel experiment in rumbustious-siscularity.
Rumbustious-siscularity, a great word. It refers to physical force, noise, and chaotic energy. The intense physical demands of the Albertan frontier clearing detritus from a rill, hauling logs, wrangling livestock.
Oh, that noise?
It clashed violently with his internal life. He wanted to spend hours engaging in epiromanicality.
Another new one.
An intense focus on complexity, so like mapping the syllable structure of a diatom under a microscope. But the world demanded rumbustious-siscularity.
It was an eternal feedback loop of physical labor just rejecting intellectual labor.
And that constant tug of war, that conflict between profound thought and practical muck shoveling, is precisely what forged his ultimate mission.
Which was?
He needed to prove that honorificability-dinititism, that state of necessary, ineluctable being, was not optional, but a non-negotiable state of existence.
And his outward appearance, I read, he was often seen in, like, rough brogans and a gingham vest.
Right, which only heightened the antithetical agraria of his true genius. He cultivated complexity as a defense.
And that defense manifested in his communication style. The source notes his resulting churlish loquacity.
A reluctance, almost a refusal, to offer short, straightforward answers.
So he was just being difficult.
Well, it was not simple rudeness. It was a conceptual shield against conceptual reduction. If you asked him a simple question, he gave you a complex, indirect response, forcing you, the interlocutor, to engage with the layered reality he perceived.
Wow.
He lived within a field of cacophonodiscolational theories, the internal noise, disharmony, and complicated logic of his mind. And the outside world had to adapt to the dissonance or just be dismissed as irrelevant.
That war between the muck and the mind had to resolve somewhere. And Yapfarkle knew his answer wasn't in Alberta. His escape, like everything else he did, was a profound philosophical statement. And this leads us into part 2. The ascent and his lexical apotheosis.
His departure from Muckhole was fittingly an exercise in maximizing complexity.
Of course it was.
He spoke only in intricate, obnuble aggregationalisms until he arrived at a major university, clutching a heavy journal bound in vellum and worsted.
Vellum and worsted, not just a notebook.
The source makes sure to emphasize the completely unnecessary complexity of his packing materials, rejecting the simple canvas bag entirely.
That's classic Yapfarkle. The pursuit then shifts from the abstract sound of his childhood to formal, tangible linguistic philosophy. And this is where he introduces his first grand conceptual umbrella, tropologicality.
Yes. At universities surrounded by peers who actually valued intellectual abstraction, Yapfarkle began to see all existence as tropologicality.
Which means?
A complex, constantly shifting, and utterly self-referential journey of linguistic transference where every object, every reality, is merely a metaphor for a deeper, more complicated idea.
The source mentions this journey is hallucinocircuitous.
Mm-hmm.
That suggests a path that is not only bewildering and disorienting, but utterly recursive. It circles back on itself, defined by its own dizzying logic.
Exactly. If every reality is a metaphor, the process of decoding existence is endless and exhausting. Reality is not a simple label or a fixed point. It's an infinite, dizzying series of interconnected analogies.
So his internal cacophonodiscolational field, all that noise, it actually became his philosophical lens.
It allowed him to thrive in this dizzying complexity.
And this mindset prepared him for the moment that defined his entire career, delivered during what I have to imagine was the most demanding academic event in history.
A 72-hour continuous lecture.
72 hours.
It was there that he introduced his master term, the word itself. Parafloxenahillipificationality.
44 letters.
44 letters long. This was his entire philosophical framework, compressed into a single, overwhelming acoustic and conceptual structure.
Okay, we have to spend serious time on this monumental word, because this is the core intellectual anchor of the entire deep dive. How do we even start to break down parafloxenahillipificationality?
Okay, we have to begin with the root at the center. The longest recognized non-medical word in English prior to Yapfarkle. Flossinacinahillapification.
Right, that one I've heard of. It's the act of estimating something as worthless.
Exactly. It's a word for the assessment of worthlessness.
So the term from the eulogy, pseudoflossinacinahillapifications, that would be the process of estimating something as worthless, but like incorrectly or based on simple metrics.
Correct. So now Yapfarkle adds the prefix para, which means alongside. His entire philosophy dictated that his honorificabilitude and entitism, his maximal worth and complexity, was not achieved by rejecting worthlessness,
No.
but by the state of existing alongside that worthlessness.
Okay, wait. So parafloxenahillificationality is the state of maintaining maximal worth while simultaneously acknowledging the absolute proximity and necessity of worthlessness.
Yes.
Value is perpetually deferred, existing always adjacent to nothingness.
It is an astonishing conceptual move. It's the ultimate acceptance of the paradox. He achieves maximal worth not through purity, but through acknowledging the inherent absurdity of existence right next door.
And then the complexity of the word itself was the statement.
Of course. It instantly made him a conceptual pariah and a god among his peers. It was the absolute maximum intellectual effort applied to a question of minimal value, which, paradoxically, maximized the value of the effort itself.
That explanation is so crucial because it means the flying pickle and his whole life, it wasn't about escaping worthlessness.
No.
It was about defining himself relative to it.
Precisely. And this entire philosophical framework then gives rise to his ultimate physical quest. If paraflux in a hylophificationality is the state of existing alongside worthlessness, he needed something that represented the ultimate total rejection of deferred value.
He needed the final escape from pseudofluxinos and hylopilifications.
He did.
He needed the gallomorphic infinitogram, which promised maximal total value.
Yeah.
So let's move now to part 3 and the incredible contradictory mythos surrounding this mythical document or object.
Yapfarkle's aperomanicality, that intense focus on conceptual complexity we talked about, was now fully channeled into finding this object.
And the sources he had were ancient.
Ancient, wildly contradictory, and yet they perfectly aligned with his internal universe of pseudo-paradoxicalizationality.
The first clue is a dizzying piece of ancient Greek conceptual chaos, a fragmentary epyllion concerning Hephaestus's forge.
Right, so the source material suggests a kind of creation myth. Before the universe was fully formed, the gods drafted the infinitogram.
But it wasn't a blueprint.
No, it was a massive, 7-sided document containing every possible contradictory truth about the cosmos simultaneously.
At the same time.
Think of it as the ultimate philosophical data dump. If one side stated all things are finite, the opposite side declared finitude is a myth.
So it's conceptual chaos distilled into a single physical document, a sesquipedalian texturology or long, complex writing of impossible length.
And to prevent this conceptual chaos from instantly collapsing the nascent universe, Zeus commanded that it be encased in fulgurite.
Fulgurite. That's glass formed by a lightning strike.
Exactly. And then hidden beneath the most restless, ornate fire pit they could find. An active volcano near modern-day Greece.
But the truth buried in the heart of chaos. It's another grand antithetic allegoria that just mirrors his muckhole beginning. Maximal truth emerging from maximal dissonance.
And Yapfarkle instantly recognized the resonance. The volcano's constant, explosive, rumbustious diabularity. Its physical force, chaotic noise, geological instability.
That was the ideal urn for this ultimate document.
To him, the chaos was the key to preservation. It ensured the materia prima, the philosophical first matter of all thought, was constantly being refined, but never simplified.
Okay, now, if the Greek myth wasn't complex enough, we have the second clue, which comes from an entirely different intellectual realm.
17th century European alchemy.
Right, which seems to contradict the idea of a massive document.
And this is where the synthesis gets truly fascinating. We encounter a man named Lugan Gorshauser.
Lugan Gorshauser.
An eccentric 17th century alchemist and self-proclaimed snolligostropist.
A what?
A snolligostropist. It's a wonderfully archaic term that implies someone is a clever but somewhat unreliable charlatan.
I'm going to start using that.
You should.
Yeah.
Gorshauser vanished in 1688 seeking this artifact.
And his manuscript described the infinitogram not as a document, but as a dense, self-contained truth. A monocircuitous sphere of experientia in mentum substantia.
Okay, let's break that down. Experientia in mentum substantia. Experience in mental substance.
Okay.
Gorshauser believed the infinitogram was an object made of pure, crystalline cognitive reality, contained within a single loop, hence monocircuitous.
So it's the final crystallized byproduct of the alchemical quest.
The philosophical stone realized not in metal but in pure thought.
So we shift from a document of contradiction to a crystalline geode of pure cognitive concept, and Gorshauser outlines specific alchemical requirements for achieving its transmutation.
He spoke of pyrolysis decomposition by high heat and the cohobation cycle.
Cohobation.
Repeated heating and distillation, all occurring within an athanor, the highly controlled alchemical furnace.
Yeah.
This quest wasn't about turning lead into gold. It was about transmuting base, common experience into pure, elevated intellectual substance.
Rejecting the pseudoflossen aphinophilifications of everyday life.
Precisely.
And Gorshauser's location key is equally bewildering. It required an impossible physical setup.
Balancing opposing forces by conceptually setting a massive, polished anvil of gabrion, a dark, heavy igneous rock upon a spinning toroid.
A heavy anvil on a spinning donut shape, that's not stable.
That image perfectly illustrates the pseudo-paradoxicalizationality of the quest's physical requirements. Stability, the anvil, balanced precariously on dynamic, perpetual motion, the toroid.
It's an impossible physical manifestation of conceptual balance.
Accessible only through a hallucino-circuitous mental state.
And Gorshauser's final entry, it detailed his use of primitive electroencephalography.
Right, measuring electrical activity in the brain.
To track his descent into hallucino-circuitous madness as he neared the truth.
And that detail absolutely fascinated Yapfarkle. The idea that the search for ultimate truth required descending into a dizzying, self-referential mental state, a hallucinocircuitous arc, it just validated his own internal apyromanicality.
So the complex internal noise, the cacophonodiscalational field he carried since childhood, that was actually the necessary prerequisite for discovery.
It suggested that the final insight wasn't reachable via linear, simple thought.
So Yapfarkle, burdened by his core honorificability merges these two wildly different sources, Greek mythology and 17th century charlatan alchemy. What's the telesophicality of his synthesis? What's the endgame wisdom?
His conclusion, the telesophicality, is brilliant in its maximal comprehensive madness. He concluded the infinigram was a massive conceptual tuber of experientia and mentum substantia hidden inside the active Greek volcano.
A conceptual tuber, a massive root-like structure of pure mental substance.
Yes. And the reason for the location?
Yeah.
He fused the ideas. The Earth's rumbustious scalarity, the volcano's constant physical chaotic energy and heat, serves as the ultimate alchemical athanor.
So it's perpetually refining and perfecting the conceptual object for millennia. The chaos of the Earth itself is the perfect philosophical laboratory.
A laboratory that rejects any notion of simple static value.
And to access a philosophical laboratory powered by volcanic chaos, well, you need an incredibly complicated vehicle that embodies this philosophy.
You do.
Which brings us to part 4 and the design of the one and only flying pickle.
The machine had to embody honorificability in every rivet, bolt, and aerodynamic curve. The need for this vehicle was an antithetical goria to conventional flight.
Right, because a simple, streamlined jet would imply the search was easy or straightforward.
And that would imply the destination was not maximally worthy.
So a bizarre, complex object suggested the search was necessary and profound, which validates his core philosophy.
Precisely. So he built a massive green airframe that resembled a tuber, or more affectionately, a pickle.
It's a pickle.
With stabilizing vanes crafted from chert, a type of microcrystalline rock. It was intentionally absurd on the outside. A glorious piece of parafloxinocity hilificationality in physical form.
Maximally complex and high-worth engineering encased in a ridiculous vegetable shape.
Proving that greatness must always acknowledge the neighboring absurdity.
And the internal engineering was a triumph of intentional complexity.
Oh, it was a dense sesquipedalian texturology of operation. It boasted a triumph of turbomolecularism engine design.
What does that even mean?
It means incredibly high-speed turbines and complex internal gyroscopes that maintained electromagnetical homeostatic balance. These weren't just standard parts. These systems were engineered to be overly difficult, rejecting the simple lift and thrust concepts of basic aeronautics.
How did that physical complexity serve his philosophical mission?
It imposed an intellectual burden that eliminated all but the most dedicated seeker. The machine's maximal complexity meant the pilot, Yapfarkle, had to be so dedicated to honorificability to do it to tanatism just to maintain flight parameters.
That any intellectual weakness,
Any lapse into simple thought would result in immediate catastrophic failure. The machine acted as a conceptual filter.
So if he simply thought, I need to turn left, the complex systems would require a 4-step, conceptually justified input sequence rather than a simple yoke movement.
Absolutely. The simple act of flying became an act of intense, sustained apyromanicality. Furthermore, Yapfarkle argued that the constant high-frequency vibration of the flying pickle was also necessary.
The required cacophonodiscalational effect.
Yes, this constant dissonance, the internal noise and physical shuddering, was theorized to force the pilot's brain into a sustained state of tropologicality,
That state of seeing everything as a bewildering, interconnected metaphor.
which was essential for finding the infinitogram's nonlinear hallucinocircuitous location. You couldn't use GPS, you needed a metaphorical brain state.
And the goal ultimately was to seize the infinitogram and achieve omnilargentiousness.
The property of being maximally generous or grand in every conceivable dimension. Total value, total concept, total being.
And this singular quest consumed him entirely. It led to a new wave of philosophical dismissal against those who didn't understand his need for complexity.
His late career philosophical work became defined by extreme churlish posiliquacity. He would dismiss the entire field of sentinelectualism.
Sentinel intellectualism.
In Yapfarkle's view, yes. It was well-meaning but fundamentally weak-willed intellectualism. The type of thought that simplifies concepts for the sake of accessibility rather than pursuing the necessary apyromanicality of true, untamed complexity.
They feared the hallucinocircuitous path.
They did.
The source illustrates his dedication, though, with these wonderful, small, anecdotal details. He wasn't just theorizing about Gorshauser's alchemy, he was actively trying to replicate it.
He conducted small, unsuccessful experiments in his gazebo, using a small athanor to attempt transmutation.
But not with noble metal.
No, with cow slime and ash residue and pomace, the pulp left after pressing fruit. He was literally trying to turn garbage into conceptual gold.
Trying to prove that even the most worthless physical residue held the potential for honorificabilitude initiatism if processed through maximum complexity.
Exactly.
And then there's the delightful absurdity of his diet. His choice of gianduja, that specific Italian hazelnut chocolate, was cataloged as an act of antithetic allegoria.
I mean, why eat a simple plain chocolate bar when you can eat gianduja? It's a simple item elevated by unnecessary complexity, combining hazelnuts and cocoa butter in the specific ratio born of historical scarcity.
So everything he consumed, everything he touched, every choice, was a rejection of the ordinary.
His life became a pure, distilled, 4-decade-long work of honorificabilitude and didatism.
Which brings us to part 5, the final ascent and the conclusion of this life's work. By 1976, Yapfarkle was 88 years old.
And living in a state of advanced transvaletudinarianism.
What is that?
Transvaletudinarianism. The eulogy suggests a state of health that has moved past mere illness, perhaps beyond caring for it entirely, or maybe a level of internal focus that rendered physical discomfort irrelevant.
His body was failing, but his mind had reached peak aperimanicality.
Yes. He calculated a highly specific active volcano target near an arête, a sharp, jagged mountain ridge on a large Greek island, a place of constant seismic rumbuncticularity.
He had to be where the chaos was strongest, where the Earth's natural athanor was operating at maximum capacity.
And his final equipment was magnificent in its bizarre specificity. The Flying Pickle was outfitted with newly ornate electroencephalography and highly sensitive electromagnetical sensors.
Designed specifically to detect the infinigram's conceptual presence.
That hallucinocircuitous wave pattern of experientia in mentum substantia.
But then we get to the personal touches, which are my favorite parts, the whole eulogy. He brought a heavy cuirass, a piece of chest armor,
Suggesting a mythological protective element.
and then an espadrille on his left foot for conceptual balance.
I love this detail. This is where the muckhole simplicity returns as a final intentional paradox. These aren't tools, they are philosophical talismans.
A heavy, medieval piece of armor for physical protection, balanced by an item of light, simple beach footwear.
It was an attempt to conceptually balance the enormous sesquipedalian texturology of the flight with a nod to the lowliest material existence.
Wait, so this genius who just mastered turbomolecularism and is tracking hallucinocircuitous wave patterns needed a simple beach shoe for conceptual balance. That's the most glorious antithetical allegoria I've ever heard. It's perfect.
And we mustn't forget the dulcimer. He brought a specific type of stringed instrument,
Why?
hoping its sound would achieve the necessary cacophonodiscalational resonance needed to disrupt the local electromagnetic field and trigger recognition of the artifact.
And before he left, he completed his final terrestrial act of philosophical assertion.
His will.
He ensured his final will, a massive 7-canto document of pure obnubile aggregationalisms would burden lawyers for decades.
Even his death had to be maximally complicated. The sesquipedalian texturology of his will was his final act of philosophical assertion. He declared that his flight was the grand antithetical allegoria that would finally resolve the pseudo-paradoxicalizationality of his existence.
Proving that maximal worth could not exist without maximal difficulty.
Exactly.
The flight itself, the source notes, was slow and highly nonlinear, a true hallucinocircuitous arc toward the Mediterranean island.
And he stopped using basic controls entirely. He was no longer flying by instrumentation or logic.
So what was he doing?
He was immersed in pure apeiromanicality, navigating purely by the whims of electromagnetical turbulence and his own internal linguistic processing, his apeirosyllabicality.
The vehicle itself transformed conceptually.
It was no longer a pickle. It was a pure tropologicality, a living metaphor powered by the very paraflosnihilificationality of its own inherent absurdity.
This sounds like a complete ecstatic fusion of man, machine, and philosophy just before the climax.
It was. And the final moments, thankfully recorded by the remote EEG unit aboard the Flying Pickle, are the climax of the source material.
What did it show?
As he neared the volcano's crater, the readings on the electroencephalography unit exploded into a blinding torrent of omnilargesciousness.
A torrent of omnilargesciousness.
This, the eulogy argues, confirmed that he had reached the threshold of experientia in mentum substantia. He'd encountered the object of pure maximum conceptual value.
And he did not attempt a landing or retrieval. He steered the flying pickle, that monument to honorificabilitude and nititism, directly into the magma.
That is the ultimate, maximal, final act of antithetical agoria. He steered the vehicle, designed at maximum complexity to validate maximal worth, into a field of complete destruction.
And the source describes this as achieving a perfect, final caput mortuum.
It does.
What does that dark alchemical residue, that caput mortuum, symbolize in his quest for maximal value?
Caput mortuum is literally deadhead. It's the worthless dark residue left over from an alchemical process once the valuable substance has been extracted. By steering his magnificent creation into the fire, achieving this perfect total residue, he performed his final, decisive act of pseudo-floccinocinobilification. It was a total, magnificent rejection of all that followed, because the intellectual process was complete.
The fusion.
The fusion of his mind with the ultimate conceptual heat source was the final chemical step, extracting the ultimate value into pure cognition, leaving the physical remains as pure worthlessness.
What an incredible, profound, and dizzyingly complicated end to a life dedicated to proving complexity is necessary for worth.
It really is.
The eulogy concludes that Yapfarkle's life is defined as a pseudo-paradoxicalizationality. His genius was the parafloxinacinahilpilificationality, the achievement of maximal worth through embracing the space next to worthlessness.
And we have spent this deep dive decoding the vocabulary, mapping his development from muck-hole robustus bliscularity to the conceptual alchemy of the final flight, and establishing the full context of his quest. Yet the gallimorphic infinigram itself remains an enigmatic sesquipedalian texturology wrapped in an obnubile aggregationalism of experientia in mentum substantia. It is massive, complex, and still incomprehensible to anyone who didn't live his life.
So what does this all mean for us, for you, the listener? We have the final explosive evidence of the artifact's presence, that EEG recording of omnilargesciousness, but we don't have the infinigram itself. We have the proof of the destination, but not the destination itself.
And this raises the essential question, one that is central to his entire philosophy of deferred and paradoxical value. Was the true omnilargesciousness, the maximal total grandeur found in the physical artifact, the infinigram? Or was it found in the magnificent, complicated, decades-long process of the search? Was the actualization of honorificabilitudinitatism accomplished by the pursuit itself, the building of the absurd, maximally complex flying pickle?
It's a question of whether the destination matters more than the chaotic, hallucinocircuitous journey that was necessary to reach it.
I mean, what is the real value of complexity if the only worthy conclusion is its total annihilation?